Good morning. Today is Friday, the 16th day of Shevat. And today we're finishing chapter 24 in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe was discussing the way a Jew is connected with Hashem and cannot be separated from Hashem, from God. And because really there is the neshama, the pinta yid, that keeps him going, wants to be constantly connected with Hashem. And that is why when he feels that something will disconnect him from God, that will be a red line that he or she will not cross, because the neshama doesn't let them cross. However, how do we get this to help you to do all of the commandments, all of the mitzvahs? So the Alter Rebbe explained in length how really every mitzvah, every commandment is a commandment of Hashem, and it connects you with Hashem, and every prohibition disconnects you from God. So when you understand this, it will help you easily to fulfill the mitzvahs of Hashem, the commandments of God, knowing that every mitzvah is equally connecting you, and every aveira, every sin equally disconnects you. However, the Alter Rebbe now is posing a question that it seems that not all mitzvahs seem to be the same. In fact, it says that there are certain mitzvahs that says the pikuach nefesh, when it comes to if it's a question of life and death, that says it pushes off all the mitzvahs, except for the three mitzvahs, the three commandments, that one should not violate them, even though his life is in question. What are the three mitzvahs? Is idolatry and murder and committing adultery, incest or adultery, something in that effect. Those three mitzvahs, a person is supposed to let himself get killed and not violate those mitzvahs. So if we say that all mitzvahs are like idol worship, like that separates you from God in the same way, then how come certain other mitzvahs that the Torah says you should violate them to save your life? So this is the question Alter Rebbe poses, and is going to explain it. And let's look inside. Says the Alter Rebbe, "Ma shepikuach nefesh doiche she'ar aveiros." Says true, we find a principle that saving a life overrides other prohibitions. Vegam yavoy ve'al yehorig. And similarly, the law calls for one to commit a transgression rather than be killed. Whereas with idolatry, incest, and murder, the law requires that he submit to death rather than commit any of one of these three. So the Alter Rebbe explains the reason why the Torah says in those mitzvahs that we should violate the mitzvahs, the prohibition, in order to save lives. As the Alter Rebbe, Hainu kepirush Chazal, as our sages explain, Amra Torah, the Torah says, Chalel olav Shabbos achas, kedei sheyishmer Shabbos arbe. The Torah declares, desecrate one Shabbos for his sake, so that he may live to observe other Shabbos. So it's not about that this mitzvah is different. The Torah Hashem wants you should be able to fulfill many Shabbos, to keep the Shabbos. So that's why if the person's life is in danger, you have to save the life so you can keep many other Shabbos. It is not because of the relative leniency of the Shabbos or gravity of the sins, such as idolatry, that one is waived while the other is not. In other words, the fact that Shabbos, you can violate the Shabbos to save your life, and you cannot violate idolatry to save your life, does not mean that Shabbos is less severe than idolatry. It is equally. And Alter Rebbe is going actually to bring proof from an halachic law. And just to be able to understand it, I want to say it outside to explain there is the law regarding the shoichet. A shoichet is a person who slaughters the animal, make it a kosher animal. In order to be able to rely on a person to be a shoichet, he has to be a good Jew, a kosher Jew. And if a person, let's say, worships idols, obviously, he's not qualified to be a shoichet. However, the law says if a person, let's say, is known to violate the Shabbos. If a person is known to violate Shabbos, he's not qualified to be a shoichet. What about if a person is known to violate another law, like, for example, adultery? That does not disqualify him from being a shoichet. So here you think, wait a second, adultery is one of the sins that the Torah says that a person should rather die than violating this sin, committing that sin. Shabbos, you don't have to die to keep Shabbos. On the contrary, you have to violate the Shabbos to save your life. So what do we see from here? We see that Shabbos, the fact that Shabbos you don't have to die, you have to violate Shabbos in order to save life, does not make it less severe than the other laws that you have to die for. Because here, in this case of the shoichet, we see a person who violates adultery is still qualified to be a shoichet. But if he violates the Shabbos, if he's known to be violating the Shabbos, then he's not qualified to be a shoichet. Here continues the Alter Rebbe Teida. He says you should know Shari Shabbos Chamurush Kula Kavod Zorah. He says the Shabbos is a grave offense and comparable to idolatry. Le'inyan shchitas mumah, with regard to the laws of shechita, the slaughtering, by anyone who habitually violates a particular precept. Mumah ledavar echad b'yeredei esim beis, ma'she'en ken b'mumah legiya ilo ha'arayos. However, a habitual sexual offender, on the other hand, someone commits adultery, does not have the same law applied to him as an habitual idolater. But at the same time, pikuach nefesh doicha Shabbos v'lo gilui arayos. Yet, in the same time, we see that saving a life pushes off, overrides the Shabbos. However, the adultery does not push off the life. So how can you explain it then? On the one hand, Shabbos is more severe. On the other hand, the other sin is more severe that you have to give your life up for. Says the Alter Rebbe, Elo de gzeiras hakosav. Rather, it is a scriptural decree that consideration of life overrides other sins, but not the three cardinal sins: idolatry, the sexual offense, and murder. Those are the three sins that the Torah specifically said, because this was God's will, that do not violate them, even though you have to give up your life. But in other words, but what does the Alter Rebbe bring out here is that the fact is that all the mitzvahs are equally a desecration of Hashem's name and a separation from God. However, the Alter Rebbe continues also that there is some differences in the effect that happens after the committing the sin. Every sin that a person commits also has a damage. It causes blemishes on the soul. And the way to cleanse oneself from these blemishes, there is differences. What sin needs what type of cleansing? There is differences. But the very fact of separating oneself from Hashem via the sin, that is equally the same by all. That's what Alter Rebbe continues. After the sinful act, however, if the sin is of the type that carries neither the penalty of karet means spiritual extinction of the soul, that the soul separates itself, cuts off the soul basically, or death at the hands of heaven. In that case, the divine soul does not completely perish and is not entirely cut off from its source in the living God. Those sins that do not have karet involved, is only through the sin and the attachment to its source is damaged through this sin, somewhat. Now, corresponding to the extent of the specific nature of the blemish caused by the sin in the soul, and in its source in the supernal world, based on these and the effect of the blemish, this is the differences of the purification process. There are various purifying processes and punishment in purgatory or in this world, meaning the suffering of the soul in purgatory or one suffering in this world, which the purpose is to purify the soul. Every sin has a special punishment. It's by cleansing, removing the stain and the blemish caused by a specific sin. Also similarly, the blemish caused by the sins carrying the penalty of death or the separation, the cutting off. They do not, they vary in their blemish, the way they affect the neshama, they vary, they're not all the same. Continues the Alter Rebbe. So he says, to return to the original point, after the sinful act, in the case of those sins which do not carry the punishment of karet and death at the hands of heaven, the sinner's animal soul, which animates the body and is clothed in it, as well as his body itself, can come and can be elevated back after the sin. They return and rise from the sitra achra and the klipa. And they draw closer to the holiness of the divine soul that pervades them. Which the godly soul, the divine soul, always believes in one God. Even during the sin, even when a person commits a sin, while he commits the sin, is still committed and still connected with Hashem. He's still meaning that the emunah, the faith, the closeness, even a person is not really, what he's doing is doing it really not with the inner powers. He's doing it because he has a foolish thought. He's not thinking well, but deeply inside he's really connected to Hashem, even while he commits a sin. But at the same time, at that time, the divine soul, when a person commits a sin, at that time, the divine soul is considered in a state of exile in the animal soul, which comes from the sitra achra, from the other side, the evil side. The animal soul makes the body sin, causes the body to sin, and it drags it down to the lowest places, to the lowest depth. And it draws the soul so deep, so low, even below the impurity of the sitra ach of the other side, as we mentioned yesterday. And the klipa of even lower than the klipa of the idolatry itself. May God protect us. So why is that? We mentioned this yesterday because the avodah zarah, after all, the evil is here for a purpose. God placed it there, but it fulfills a mission to try us, to test us, to challenge us. But when a person with a godly soul goes and falls there, we have free choice. And yet we fell to these places, so we fall even lower than them. So the Alter Rebbe says, there is no greater exile than this exile. Meaning that the divine soul falls from such a high place. The neshama of a Jew is so high, connected with Hashem. Kamoshin Isbaal as explained earlier, the Sheireshu Mokir Nafshes Kol Beis Yisrael, that the source and the root of the souls of all the Jewish people. Umechochma ilah. It is from divine wisdom. Vehu Yisborech vechochmasai echad v'chulu. And God and His wisdom are one and the same. And what happens when a person commits a sin? He drags that divine wisdom, that godly soul, he drags it down wherever he goes. Because the Alter Rebbe brings it a very, very harsh example, it says over here. It is comparable to one who seizes the king's head, drags it down, and dips his face in a privy full of filth. Full of excrement, it says of here. This is the ultimate humiliation. There's no greater humiliation than that. Taking the king, putting him in a place full of filth, its head. Even if he does it only for a moment, just for a moment, like the king's head in a place full of excrement, just for a moment. That's the greatest humiliation you can do. Because the klippes and the sitra achra, the shells, the evil, the other side, they're called vomit and filth, as it is known. So what is the positive side we take from this? What is the positive point we take out from this? Because number one, we have to remember how kind and how special Hashem is acting with us, that he allows himself, so to speak, to be dragged into the place of full of filth. So we have to understand the power of our neshama, and at the same time appreciate how much the effect that happens, being that we are the children of Hashem. We have the neshama with us. Whatever we do has a tremendous effect. But in the same time, says the Alter Rebbe, even though if God forbid a person did do it, he can pick himself up and go back and reconnect. As long as we are here in this world, we can do it. To reconnect and to reconnect to the Eibishter, and with our neshama, that it should shine in the brightest way. So this is the end of today's shir, and the end of chapter 24 in Tanya. This Shabbos is a very special Shabbos. It's called the Shabbos Shira, the Shabbos of the sun. When the Jewish people were singing together with Moshe Rabbeinu, says that was very, very special. This is also part of the showing the neshama, that we were so great, even equal. It says in Chassidus, the neshama of the simple Jew was equally great as Moshe Rabbeinu himself at that moment, at that time, when they crossed the sea, the Yam Suf. It says even a simple maid saw on the ocean what the greatest prophet could not see. So we relive this also, and very soon we'll be zeicha to seeing it once again with the coming of Mashiach. Thank you so much for joining, and any question we can take now.